Welcome to This Is My Architecture. I'm Matt from AWS. If you've been watching this series, you know that normally we talk to customers and partners about how they build their solutions on top of AWS. But once in a while we talk to our own internal teams and learn how they build their own solutions. So today I'm joined by Santiago from the AWS Quick Start team. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
So what is AWS Quick Start and what do you do?
So AWS Quick Start, we built Quick Starts, and which are reference deployments on AWS for key workloads. They use best practices, and they're built with partners and with AWS solution architects.
So when you say key workloads, what does that mean? What type of Quick Starts are there?
It's a whole variety of Quick Starts. So we have anywhere from enterprise workloads all the way to open source tools and deployments.
Great. So are these CloudFormation templates or scripts, or how are they built?
Correct. They're a combination of assets. So they're CloudFormation templates with accompanying scripts to do bootstrap and do the deployment itself. It also comes with a deployment guide that gives you kind of a step-by-step guide of how it was created and what the reference was all about.
Great. So AWS Quick Starts allow customers to deploy sort of automatically, almost as if they had an auto solutions architect, complex architecture following best practices and guidance, so they're highly available, et cetera.
Yep.
Great. So today we're looking at SQL Server 2017 on EC2. Is that right?
That's right.
So we have Amazon RDS, and that supports SQL Server 2017. So why would a user need to use Quick Start to deploy that?
Yeah, so it gives them a lot of flexibility. This particular Quick Start deploys an always-on availability group configuration that uses a Windows Server failover cluster. A little bit different than RDS. RDS actually uses for multi-AZ. They make use of SQL mirroring.
Okay, great. So we always say we're about user flexibility, user choice. So you can use RDS to deploy SQL Server, but if you want to deploy it yourself on EC2, you have other choices?
Yeah, correct. You have the choices of this Quick Start, and also it gives you a bit more flexibility and ownership. So there's cases where a customer may want direct access to the file system or administrative access to the instances, and this Quick Start lets them do that.
Okay, great. So some customers who want to get direct access to the machine, log in as an administrator and perhaps install an agent or do other things, they can do that with this architecture.
Correct.
Okay, so tell me how it's built. I mean, I imagine that this is just part of the picture that we have up here. Is this all one CloudFormation template? How are you building it?
So with Quick Starts, we try to package everything in one piece, but you can also deploy on an existing VPC or on a brand new VPC. In this example, we have a new VPC that actually comes from our VPC Quick Start, which is another Quick Start that we use as a foundational piece for a lot of different other Quick Starts as well.
So does that mean that you have sort of multiple or nested CloudFormation templates?
That's right. We make use of the stack nesting functionality in CloudFormation to orchestrate all the different stacks that are deployed.
Okay, so if I was a user though, and I'm looking at this, I mean, what's stopping me from just writing my own CloudFormation? What is hard or what is complex about this Quick Start?
Yeah, so this particular Quick Start, just thinking about just the SQL workload, is over 3,000 lines just in CloudFormation code. And on top of that, when you're creating all the different scripts, for you to do things like joining a domain or renaming the machine, creating the failover cluster, there's hundreds of PowerShell lines of code that were written to create that particular configuration.
So you have hundreds of lines of PowerShell scripting, thousands of lines of JSON or YAML for your CloudFormation templates. So this effectively saves you a ton of time.
Yes.
And prevents, I imagine, human error too.
Correct.
Okay, great. So we have here a VPC Quick Start. You said that's one component of it. And then within that, we have SQL Server 2017 deployed on EC2. So let's talk about some of the components here. So up top, I see we have, well, first of all, we have two availability zones and public and private subnets. So what is this piece up here? What is starting up at the top?
Yeah, so this particular piece here is another Quick Start that we deploy as a part of the layering system here.
Yeah.
And this is actually remote desktop gateways. So remote desktop gateways, you can think of, they're basically bastions for Linux, but in this case, they're actually bastions for Windows.
Okay, so you have bastion hosts that allow administrative users or people who need to do stuff on the clusters to log in remotely.
Yeah. So just like NAT gateways handle the outgoing traffic, the remote desktop gateways will handle your incoming like administrative type of traffic.
Securely.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so that's the public component. You have NAT gateway for outbound internet traffic. You have remote desktop gateways for sort of secure access to the environment. Then in the private subnets, I imagine where this is the actual SQL Server 2017 magic. So what's going on down here?
Correct. So as part of the SQL workload itself, you can actually deploy, we deploy this in two different private subnets. And one of the instances that we deploy here is a SQL Server. So it's called that SQL 1. And on the other side, on the other private subnet, we deploy SQL 2. These are the two SQL Server instances that are in a failover cluster, Windows Server failover cluster.
Okay, so earlier we were talking about how Quick Starts give you best practices so you can be highly available. So how are you actually handling high availability here? Is this in an auto-scaling group or what's going on here?
Yeah, so for the remote desktop gateway piece, we are in an auto-scaling group. However, for the SQL Server side of things, we're actually in a failover cluster. So what we do is we do synchronous commits, and we do automatic failover of the instances themselves.
Okay, so you have automatic failover across availability zones and it's an always on availability group. That's great. So this is across 2 availability zones. Can you go across more than 2? Could you have 3, for example?
Yeah, so the quick start via its parameters, you can set the parameter to say deploy on 3 AZs, and it'll deploy another set of public and private subnet with a SQL Server instance and a 3rd AZ.
So some of our larger customers have even more complex availability requirements and they want to have multi-region deployments. Is that possible here?
Yes, so if you deploy this exact same quick start in another region, what you can do is you can set up a distributed always-on availability group listener, and with that you would not do the you would actually do asynchronous commits and with a manual failover.
Great. Okay. So you have a highly available SQL Server cluster, SQL Server 2017 running on EC2. You have a remote desktop gateway and the public subnets here. So then moving down, I see some additional components. What is this representing down here?
Yeah. So in order to create cluster quorum, you need a file share witness to be able to basically watch the 2 SQL Server instances to make sure that they're functioning. In the 3 AZ case, however, we can actually get rid of this, and when it moves to another AZ, you can set it to be a failover, another failover cluster node, or it could be a file share witness as well.
Okay, great. And then lastly, we have, if I remember my AWS icons correctly, I think this is Aws Directory Services. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So what is that used for here?
Yeah, so that's used for identity and authentication, and what it is that this actually deploys across the 2 AZs. And it is used for the SQL servers themselves to join to a domain, and for also to do some Windows authentication at the same time.
Okay, so these are running on Windows Server and they can join to a domain on your directory services. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, what if I have my own domain already? Do I still need to use this, or how does that work?
No, so because of the layering that we do of this different templates via the stack nesting, there is actually a distinct template, CloudFormation template, that deploys just the SQL workload.
Okay.
This particular template that deploys the Active Directory is a separate quick start that we layered in at the same time as we do for the remote desktop gateways and the VPC.
That's really interesting because of the modular way that you've built this. At every step of the way, it gives you that flexibility. If you want to use your own domain, that's fine. If you want to just deploy the VPC, you can use just that component. I really like the way how you built this up kind of with building blocks of CloudFormation for quick starts. Great. Well, thanks for sharing this with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
And thanks for watching. This is My Architecture.